Hey Dave, when you used to be of trick-or-treating age, were you a fan of cheap-ass homemade costumes? And if so, what was your cheapest assest costume?
Um, no, I don't think I was. I mean, I don't think I had a problem with those costumes, but I don't think I had one like that. I'm sure you're a creative guy. I'm sure you had a homemade costume at some point.
I mean, my mommy made me homemade costumes. I don't know if I personally ever made a homemade costume. I was a ghost numerous years, which, as a sheet that was tailored with a hole in it. But I
Okay,
mean, I also didn't grow up, in mansions like you. I didn't, necessarily have, Hollywood effects produced costumes like you did. So,
well that's true. I mean, I definitely had the masks that you can't breathe through.
mm, mm,
With the little holes that you
yep,
can't breathe through. Do they still sell those things?
not legally.
It's a shame.
It is a shame. Hollywood is just not the same as it used to be. Kids these days, they don't get it.
Stupid government.
Yeah, I mean, excessively stupid government. Welcome to the First Picture Show, an ongoing series where we discuss horror and thrillers from all your favorite streaming platforms and anything else we damn well please. I'm the man with no name, Jason Monet. I'm here with critic extraordinaire David Joseph. Hi, Dave. How's it going this week?
It's going okay. How are you?
I'm okay. I mean, I'm surviving the cold. It's bitterly, wonderfully wintry here, finally.
Yeah, it's pretty horrible.
I mean, horrible. That's a tough assessment. I mean, it's winter. It's supposed to be cold.
Yeah, it's supposed to be cold, not brutal. Zero is not New York City. That's crazy,
Well, I mean, maybe that's the way things should be.
I guess.
It can only make you stronger. And you need to be stronger.
That's ouch.
Um, Murder party. Parties. Some people love them. Some people hate them. Some people randomly go to them, and those people are occasionally trapped in a nightmarish hell where they must fight for survival by any means necessary. In Murder Party, a relatively timid and lonely NYC traffic cop, named Chris, decides to get out of his rut by using a randomly found invitation to a mysterious Halloween party in Brooklyn. What he actually finds is an abandoned warehouse filled with preening, drugged-out artists who have hatched a devious plan to use Chris to make their own cutting-edge work, all in the name of winning grant funding from a weirdly controlling patron. But, like with all art projects, nothing ever goes quite as planned. Dave, what'd you think?
So I had a lot of fun with this. And as soon as I saw the conceit of the film, I was like, this is going to be right up your alley because these are your people. I mean, like your fellow artists.
Yeah, I do feel like there was definitely some interesting sly takes on a lot of people I know. Also, not just fellow artists, but fellow Brooklynites. It was sort of a double one-two punch there in terms of the satire, I think.
I mean, you could have been in this movie.
And maybe I was. It's hard to say. I think it. Yeah, it's hard not to be charmed by this movie in some capacity. It's definitely a true indie. This felt like a movie that kids would have made in their backyards on zero budget with zero resources, but just with a lot of heart. And I think it's like you can't knock the can-do spirit behind that. I mean, it can be kind of rough around the edges. The performances were occasionally hard to watch. Some things, the production was clearly DIY, but that's why it's just utterly charming.
For a first feature, I thought it was a pretty solid attempt, and I thought the writing was it was at least funny. I mean, I definitely think maybe some of the lines were a little cringeworthy, but they were clearly completely tongue in cheek, and I laughed at this a lot. So
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know
Well, how sober were you?
that it was before work, so I was
Oh, that's the most
almost
sober.
completely sober.
I'm sorry. I mean, I agree. It wasn't so much the script. I think that there were funny lines in this. I just think the performances are by act. Well, the performances are by people. I don't really know how many of them are trained actors. I don't think everyone was. And I feel like the comedy suffered from that a little bit because I don't think they were comedic actors. And I think that sometimes some of the scenes could have been probably funnier because the people that were delivering the lines just didn't quite nail the timing, or they didn't quite nail the delivery, or things fell a little flat. But still, overall, it was a funny film. And I think that that brings me to my first question, really, to have it, which is This is a movie that had a lot of black humor. It had satire, and it also had horror. Which aspect won out?
Well, I think it's a close split. If I have to choose one, I'd say it's probably horror. But I don't I'm not going to take issue with someone who disagrees. I think that parts of it are just so hard to watch. I definitely looked away a couple of times. Um,
And you're not talking about the horror parts. You're talking about other parts, or are you talking about horror parts?
the horror
Oh,
parts. I
you're
mean,
talking about the horror parts. Okay.
it was just it was pretty gruesome. I mean, like, and I knew because I'd seen all his other films, his more recent ones. I figured uh, there was going to be some pretty ultra violent scenes, and it definitely delivers on that.
It
So,
does.
I mean, how do you see it? How do you see it breaking down? Comedy or horror?
It's really a comedy movie that has some horror moments in a way. I mean, I guess you could say any movie that has any horror element in it is likely to be taken over by the title.
Hmm.
It's hard not to call this a horror movie because nowhere else would you ever see this kind of violence or gratuitous, gore in any kind of other situation. Those things happened in a pretty limited capacity in this movie overall. And the movie itself mostly spent its time sort of diving into these relatively comedic characters. And for a while, I thought maybe there really wasn't a horror movie. Maybe it was just a comedy set on Halloween that suggested there might be some horror involved in it. The movie had a lot of shifting tones. Do you feel like it fit together well?
I think it does. I think it does fit together pretty well because I mean, While it does shift around, it telegraphs where it's going. So I mean, pretty early on what kind of movie this is going to be, and that you need to be ready. You need to be on your toes because it's coming. It's coming.
What was the moment where you feel like, oh, this is now definitely going to be horror?
I think that as soon as he walks in to the party, uh, you more or less know
Hmm.
uh, you know what's about to go down. I mean, what do you think?
I guess I didn't really know how much comedy or whatever would be in this, so I wasn't expecting that. Maybe
Hmm.
why I'm focusing on it now. Yeah, I mean, there's a bloody scene at the very beginning with one of the characters,
Yes.
the cheerleader,
Hmm.
that kind of comes out of the blue, and that could set a tone for it. But then, again, you spend the next hour or so sort of wandering around with these other characters that are not really doing horrific things as much as just being like, embarrassing. There really wasn't a lot of other horrific elements that happened between the very first suggestion and really the resolution with all the different gore in it.
I didn't know if it was going to be kind of like a slow burn, like a domino kind of effect. Like, are we going to watch them get knocked off one at a time? Um, and I'm kind of glad it doesn't really go that way. So it's a little more unpredictable in that way.
Unless you watch this review, in which case now it's no longer. No, I'm just
Uh,
kidding. I'm kidding.
if you're one of the 2 to 7 people that watch this show, um, really you should watch the movie
Yeah, watch the
first.
movie first. Or check out our quick new spoiler free shorts, completely easygoing experience where we do not give away everything in the movie.
It's got to be difficult for you to piece that together because I
Oh,
just
yes. Nah, I mean, my feeling is like if you're watching, I think I state pretty clearly in the title, like if you're going to watch this, you are aware that we're doing a full spoiler. I mean, this is
deep analysis, so
it's fine.
deep.
You were saying before that it wasn't necessarily surprising to see the kind of shocking violence in this movie that you might expect from a Saulnier picture. I mean, this is directed by Jeremy Saulnier. I'm saying his name right, right?
yeah,
Saulnier.
I think
Yeah.
so.
It's directed by Jeremy Saulnier, who we became familiar with through his sophomore project, Blue Ruin. I think that was both your and my first experience with him, right?
Hmm.
Of course, he's also directed The Green Room from a couple years ago, which is very violent and bloody in a shocking way, and also pretty good. It's kind of interesting to see this movie, his first feature, because you're starting to see some of these foundations for other aspects that he's developed. You can say now, like, there's a very common theme and thread running through all his movies about basically the underdog. There's always this sort of like character that's oppressed by the situation they're around, and they have to fight against the odds to get out of it. And it's funny because I feel like in his later movies, his characters have a realness to them, and like a humility to them that seems very believable. They don't seem necessarily like actors trying to act like that. They actually seem like believable people. But this movie also was probably the least realistic of his movies. I mean, did you feel like they had to be believable in this movie? Do you feel like was that important for this kind of movie?
I almost think it was important for it to not be.
Hmm.
Just to throw any uh, reality out the window and just make it completely silly and just go with it. If you get too realistic with the comedy horror thing, it's just unsettling. It's unpleasant. And you don't really get to enjoy either aspect. Now, sometimes I think that's what the director is trying to achieve is to just unsettle you. And there's something to be said for that as well. But the conceit of this film doesn't really lend itself to that. I don't think it's not. I definitely think there's some satire, but it's really, I think he's kind of poking fun at a certain demographic.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think satire was sort of the main thrust of the comedy in this film. I mean, it's interesting because we're talking about comedy and horror in this situation, and I think our first feature film that we reviewed, Terrifier, also you could say had some comedic elements to it, but very very different in terms of presentation. I mean, the comedy there was built around the idea of cruelty in a way that's missing from this movie. This movie is actually about laughing at sort of these again stereotypical characters. If you just like edited out 10 minutes or so of this movie, it wouldn't really be a horror anymore. There's really not necessarily a lot of horror in it.
That's pretty accurate. Yeah, I mean, you definitely. I feel like you could probably edit this for television.
It's interesting because I was reading an interview with Saulnier today, actually, where he was talking about the genesis of Blue Ruin, and apparently Blue Ruin originally was also going to be a comedy. So I think that maybe that's where he starts. I think he starts with the idea of dark humor, and I think that we saw him do it with this because that's what he's comfortable with, and maybe as he's progressed and become more mature as a filmmaker, he's sort of spun into more serious and darker territories because of it. But maybe this is really his keystone.
Yeah, I really can't wait for you to see the newest one, Hold the Dark, because it is, I think it's a pretty stark departure from what he's done previously.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I mean, like it goes away from all that. I mean, it's hard to imagine that having started as a comedy.
It's funny. I think that we personally probably react to the comedy because we also know where the satire is coming from. I mean, Dave, how long have you lived in New York now, in general?
Well, off and on. It's been the last couple years I've been here most of the time, and I was here for 5 years before. So,
I mean, it's interesting because I don't know if you felt the same way, but watching this movie last night for me, it was very nostalgic. It was shot in Williamsburg around 2005, 2006. That's roughly when I was going to Williamsburg as well, and there were things I saw that I'm like, oh, I recognize that, and oh, I know where that is. I reacted very positively to this movie because it is kind of a time capsule. It's funny, there's a scene in this movie where one of the characters, Alexander, who's sort of like the weird patron guy, is explaining his grand plans to everybody in the warehouse, and he makes a reference to how that whole area that they're in at the moment in the warehouse will eventually be high-rise condos and artist lofts and blah, blah, blah. He's saying this in 2006, and now it actually is all those things. It literally is nothing but high-rise condos right there. So it was pretty funny and prescient. And also it's like, aha, there's an extra layer to the comedy in this, I think, seeing all these people that I recognize from the past, and I also recognize as being inherently sort of Brooklyn-y, hipstery guys.
Oh, yeah, and I think it also, those are guys that we, not literally, but those are guys that we, hung out with in college and hung out with, in New York. When in our previous lives,
yeah.
I've always been more of a Queens guy than a Brooklyn guy, but
yeah, you're more real. I mean, you had the reality, the gritty reality of Queens in your blood.
But yeah, I think the same stuff's about to happen there. I mean, it's been happening slowly, but I think the Amazon arrival is probably gonna speed that up.
It's funny, the person I was watching with last night commented that the scenes that involve these characters running through a roof party was like the most realistic representation of a roof party she'd ever seen. So there you go. I mean, it really felt like they were actively involved in walking through somebody's event. And I also read that their opening scenes where Chris, the main character, is walking from Bedford Avenue to this warehouse were all just shot in the street in October 2005 before they'd actually figured out the movie. So that was all real stuff. I mean, that was all just completely, accurate.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, I really loved seeing that. So
I feel like, the scene towards the end of the movie where, um, basically all these people in an art gallery are murdered with an
yeah,
axe.
yeah,
And then people walk into the art gallery and are looking at it as if it were art. And I kind of think that could happen. Like
sure, it could definitely happen. And it's not necessarily a overused joke, but like for instance, I don't know if you saw the trailer for Velvet Buzzsaw, Jake Gyllenhaal's new movie. It's basically about murders that happen in an art gallery, and they have actually a very similar theme in the trailer. But Saulnier got there first. I mean, he's
because I remember my roommate, one of my roommates that you know very well, was an art major in college, and he was really annoyed with one of his professors. So he gave me some paints, and he was like,
do this.
"Why don't you just slap something on canvas here, and
Yeah.
I'll just bring it to I'll bring it to class and see what he says, see if he thinks it's a real thing." And I did that, and he didn't. In fairness to the professor, it's not like he liked it. He didn't say anything good about it, but he did think that it was earnestly done. Like he.
I mean, Dave, maybe you should explore these talents that you've never really given a chance. What if you're an earnest painter and you just haven't really had the ability to break out yet?
What I did was I just basically drew all these different shapes and started painting them different colors.
There's a strong tradition for that in abstract expressionism. And I have no complaints about the representation that I saw. I mean, there's bullshit everywhere.
But it's hard to and I think this is one of the things that the movie. I mean, I definitely think it's poking fun at it, but it's also just where do you draw that line? Like, how do you? It's kind of
sure.
an interesting perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the most heated topics in the art world is what is art, and that's been that way for thousands of years. This is like Saulnier's. I assume this is Saulnier's sort of like stab at that. I mean, he's a graduate of NYU Film School, so he's also been around artistic types, and he's been around New York types. And I'm assuming that he's building off his own somewhat personal experiences by building this satire. So, I thought he probably had a lot of fun skewering some of the scenesters that were involved in this. So. Murder Party was actually made for $160,000 pre-promotion, but just to start to finish for the actual production itself, $160,000. Pretty good, pretty cheap.
Yeah.
It was truly low budget in DIY. And it was also noticeably, I think, low budget in DIY. Did that get in the way for you at all, or do you feel like that just fit the nature of the horror?
I thought about it, and it could be that he just lucked into it, but I think that he mapped it out real well, and I think he kept the he didn't try and do anything overly ambitious as far as sets or effects or anything like that. I thought the practical effects were pretty good, and he's most of the movie, I'd say probably 80, maybe 85% of the movie is just in one room, which
Yes.
I think helps a lot.
Yeah.
So no, it didn't bother me. I thought he made great use out of his budget.
I guess for me, it was like some of the practical effects were definitely more involved than others. There were some really cheap, like, squib effects with the gun stuff, which, it doesn't bother me. On the other hand, there were some really complicated effects that they did, which I'm assuming they put all, like you're saying, they put all their effort and resources into, and those came out pretty well, in fact. What happens with Macon Blair's character, who plays a werewolf, is horrific and grotesque, and also works really well in terms of what they were trying to do with his character. And the makeup was very believable. I mean, I think that was a really interesting idea. What happens at the end with the chainsaw to the head, I mean, they really put some effort into that. I don't know how they pulled it off entirely, but it looked pretty good. I think for me, some of the stuff that kind of got in the way was like things were like around ADR maybe, or some of the sound recording in general was a little bit off, which made people's lines get a little bit garbled, I think, and sometimes things fell a little flat. Like you're saying, I think it's wise if you have a limited budget or resources to have sort of one environment. It's like a bottle episode thing. Having said that, I wish that maybe they had a little bit more involvement in making that space sort of theirs. But it wasn't the kind of thing that distracted me. I think it's the kind of thing that added to the realism of it in a way. I mean, there was almost like a found footage quality to this movie.
Yeah, oh, yeah, absolutely. And I wish I knew how much money they had for Terrifier,
I
but
would say a lot more.
I would think substantially more. The scene that sticks in my head is just the end of Terrifier, and in that that's supposed to be a coroner's office.
Right.
It's just ridiculous.
Somebody's basement apartment that they managed to move into.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't. There's nothing in Murder Party that I think looks as bad as that does.
No, and it all looks real. I mean, like we were saying with the rooftop party, that looked very real to me. When they were wandering into different sort of like art spaces in the warehouses, that looked very real to me. I mean, that's stuff I've definitely felt like I've been to. I think it's sort of like their lack of resources helped them in the same way that, like, the way that Bruce the shark malfunctioning helped Spielberg make Jaws. Like, they were forced to focus on other things that made the movie more interesting, I think. So, given the sort of DIY nature and the practical effects like we were talking about, what did you think overall of the violence and the gore in this film?
I mean, I think that it was really well done. I mean, it got me. It got me a couple times. There are scenes that are hard to watch. It's kind of like you're paying your penance for having laughed at this scenario,
did you feel bad for any of the characters?
I wouldn't go that far. I mean, it's just too. Either look at that for better or for worse, and I think you could make the argument that it's for better. You don't get real attached to any of these guys. They're all pretty cartoonish. I think. I don't know. Maybe did you see it differently? Were you?
No.
Yeah, did you have any like real moment where you were like, oh no, that guy, not him?
I certainly wanted the main protagonist, Chris, to survive. I really identify with him and sort of hoped for his survival. So that was.
Yeah, I don't think that I ever really considered that he wouldn't.
You never did. I mean, at the end,
you don't know. You're right. You don't know.
The thing is, I mean, this movie, like you were saying earlier, it took some left turns in a sense. Like, it didn't necessarily follow exactly the conventions you might expect. And given that it was so independently produced, I mean, it could have just ended in everybody being killed at once and then a blackout. I mean, who knows, right? I mean, but then, okay, so speaking of characters, let's talk about some of the performances. Was there anyone that really stuck out to you, for better or for worse?
The Wolfman.
That's Macon Blair, who plays.
I love that guy. He's been great in every one of his films, and it's hard for me to put my finger on whether it was a great performance or kind of a neat performance, or if it was just me being like, oh hey, it's that guy, he's awesome.
Right. Well, I thought it was interesting seeing. I mean, seeing Macon Blair. First off, he played Macon, the character who wears a werewolf. I guess I feel like I've seen how he's progressed as an actor, because I don't believe he's ever had, at least at this point in this movie, he hadn't ever had formal training as an actor. He was just one of the original group of kids, along with Jeremy Saulnier, that would make homemade movies in their backyards when they were all young.
Had Saulnier graduated already, or?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure Saulnier already graduated film school by the time they made this. Saulnier, he grew up and he had a bunch of friends that they made videos for school projects and stuff like that with all throughout. And he's roughly our age, so he grew up, in the late 80s, early 90s, in a sense, doing that stuff. And then all of them, or a bunch of them, kind of stayed together in the film industry, and they formed this separate production company called the Lab of Madness. And the Lab of Madness has, I think, been attached to almost all Saulnier's projects since then. Or at least it was attached to Blue Ruin. I don't know if it was attached to Green Room. But really, the Lab of Madness began with him and Macon Blair and Chris Sharp, who also plays Chris in this movie. So it's the three of them. And then I think some of the other guys that showed up in this movie, like Paul Goldblatt, who plays Paul the vampire, and William Lacey, who plays Bill, the baseball fury guy from the Warriors, also helped out with him. All these people really didn't necessarily start in the industry, but they all became involved in the industry as all of them stuck together and worked on their skills. And so Macon Blair, it's fun to see him in this, because I feel like he has honed his acting abilities quite a bit since this movie.
Oh yeah, and when you see Hold the Dark, you'll be
yeah.
He's great, and it's kind of cool to. I love that he's in every one of his films. I wonder if they'll keep doing that, because I don't know. I like just kind of watching them, kind of progress together. But
absolutely. I mean, there's a quality there that's like what happened with Sam Raimi and Bruce. You know,
Campbell, yeah,
I mean, like
it's a good point.
I love the idea that there are all these groups of kids that were screwing around with like handheld devices for videoing and taking film, and they all became kind of production companies as they got older, which is great. I love the fact that Saulnier and his friends started as kids, and now they are actually doing this for real, which is that makes the whole thing even more impressive. And also, I think that it kind of shows in how this movie came together. It really did feel like a group of friends hanging out in a way.
Yeah, which ones stood out to you?
Well, I gotta say, I really did like Chris Sharp's performance as Chris, as the cardboard knight guy.
Yeah.
Just because I think that he actually did have pretty good comedic chops. I think that he kind of understood timing, and he knew how to be a little bit physical about stuff in a funny way. He did a lot by not being able to say much or move much. He was kind of directing everything with his eye movements and his expressions, and I think that actually worked out pretty well. On the flip side of that, I feel like William Lacey, who played Bill, the baseball fury guy, was trying to be very sort of like creepily quiet in a way, or maybe like understated in a way because of how he turns out to be the most evil of them. But to me, it just felt very wooden and very like low energy, and I missed half his lines. I feel like a lot of them were just a little bit too mumbled.
He had the line that I think might have been my first laugh, and it's really the only line that I think I remember exactly is, "I didn't sign up for second degree assault party."
I didn't sign up for second degree assault party.
I laughed at that, but I mean, I do think that his delivery of it was a little bit stayed. Honestly, I mean, it just felt a little forced to me. I don't know, but it's a funny line,
Yeah, it is, and I think you don't know, how they had access to the space, and if they had a very limited amount of time, and they couldn't just keep going and trying doing things over and over again. They just had to just shoot it and go. I don't know.
Yeah, well, from what I've understood, they did definitely piece together over a period of time as people could show up and do things. Other performances, Stacey Rock as Lexi. I thought that she was enjoyably frenetic. And also the cat named Sir Lancelot. His real name is Puff Snooty.
Oh wow!
Yeah. They put this together with glue and gumption, basically. So,
I mean, it turned out real well for something like that.
It did. I mean, they won audience award at Slamdance 2007, which was what got them a lot of notice to begin with, and that's why this movie was it was picked up by Magnolia after that, I believe, to be distributed. So
I don't know if it was in theaters at all, if it was New York, LA, or
I don't know, but I do know that people do still play it at like theaters for Halloween, and I think that it shows up in festivals every once in a while. So, and apparently people, I think it's grown as a cult movie now, especially with Saulnier's more visible success. I think people have been returning to it. It's good to see somebody like succeed. Somebody that's really been working at it their whole life, even beyond just their career. It's a pretty nice thing to see them succeed and actually accomplish what they went out to be.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely one of the guys that whenever he puts one out, I'm excited for him.
Yeah. Okay, so as always, I must ask, would we have survived?
You mean if we're sitting in the chair, if we're tied up to the chair?
Let's assume that we got the invite to the party, that we somehow found it on the street and decided to go. Would we have survived the party?
All right, so here's what I'd say. You wouldn't have shown up in the first place because you always have stuff to do on Halloween. You're a partier, you're a planner. I'm the guy that wanders in and gets killed.
Whoa! Except, would you in this scenario? I mean, it seems the odds are pretty high, I think, in that situation that you would survive.
I don't know. I mean, that's it. I think they definitely pull the camera away, so you don't exactly see how he gets loose. Because I've never been real confident that I could get myself out of being tied up, like everyone in every movie always does. I'm always like, I don't understand. How does that seem to happen?
You don't have to be confident about being able to get out of like a tied up rope. You just have to be confident about people's inability to tie a knot securely, which I think is, that's a fair assumption. A lot of people are really terrible at knots. Let's assume that you did manage to get free.
Oh, well, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, they're all dead. They're all dead, and I'm gonna.
I mean, this is a horror movie where the villains are predestined to kill each other ultimately.
Yeah. It really. That's exactly what it is. It pulls it off quite well.
Yeah. if we're gonna like list some quick items, bam, 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 as usual. If you were going to point out some bad things, do you have a list of bad things you would point out?
No, I guess this movie more or less just delivered for me. I like you said, I think there were some opportunities maybe where if they were able to, it would have benefited from another go and reshooting a line or two. Maybe they did. Maybe doing that just kind of makes it stale, and they threw those out and went with something else. By and large, I don't have a whole lot of complaints. I thought the movie pretty much delivered what it was intending to.
For me, I think I would say the performances were a little hit and miss, and that detracted from some of both the comedic and the horror elements to me. I'd also say, like, in general, and I think this is true for anybody's first movie project. I think the editing needed to be cleaned up a little bit. There were some jump cuts that didn't quite connect and that didn't actually make sense. We didn't really talk about this, but Sandy Barnett's character, who plays Alexander, who's sort of the rich patron guy that they're all trying to impress, steps out of the room at one point, followed by his coked up dog, and then he returns all bloody. And I think the assumption is supposed to be that the dog attacked him and tore his face off, but it's not entirely clear. I think that's what they're going for, but it's not like they really connected the dots on that. So there were just some editing things like that could have happened. I would also say there were some really long shots that didn't really have to be as long as they were. There was definitely the use of Steadicam in this, and I think that Saulnier used it to kind of like twirl around the group numerous times as they were discussing things, and sometimes it just felt like a little bit too much. It felt a little too heavy-handed. But I think
It's funny because I was gonna mention that as something I really liked. I'm always fascinated when the way people shoot people sitting in a circle and talking.
Yeah.
And how many cuts they use and how they, kind of weave it so that you're not bumping into the back of people's heads. And he definitely, there was a kind of a pattern that he kept using where he would, swing slowly to the left and then kind of bring it back to the right and up to the upper right. And I found myself taken with that and enjoying the way he was doing it, but also realizing that I probably shouldn't be focused on it, and I was. So I like it, and I like sort of stylized shots like that, but I can see how other people might not.
Yeah, I think it always depends on whether or not you find it distracting. If you're ever conscious of the camera, sometimes it can get in the way of watching the movie itself. I do feel like there was some filler in this film that probably could have been cut down. It was only 80 minutes, but it felt like maybe it was stretched into 80 minutes. And then finally, overall, I do feel like the movie struggled a little bit to find its footing with the tone. I just think that it was trying to mash together a couple different elements, and both the elements were successful in their own right, but I don't know if they blended as well as they could have. But still, there's plenty of good stuff to talk about. Dave, what do you feel about the good stuff?
I enjoyed the camera work, and I also I thought I liked the practical effects, things I mentioned already, practical effects, and I thought it was a kind of a funny script, just kind of reliving the mid-aughts in New York. I think that it definitely is something that a lot of people are gonna pick up on, but probably most people it won't even affect them at all.
Yeah, it's definitely an extra layer that I think that we appreciated on a personal level. Yeah, I guess I would echo a bunch of things that you just said. It was just the enjoyment of watching a DIY project with some real heart behind it, in a way. You could really tell that this was a labor of love for these people. The amateurish aspects of it were charming. And it made it funnier to some degree, and I think that it was just an enjoyable watch overall because of that. Verdict? Would you suggest people watch it?
Yeah, I think I would. Part of me wishes that I could have started at the beginning. I almost did. Started with Blue Ruins, so wasn't jumping all over the map like I did with Scorsese or Kubrick or something. It stands on its own. It's not like you need to be watching it just to study the director, but when you kind of add that to it, though, it's even more interesting.
Yeah, seeing the foundation for something that you've come to appreciate even more makes it all the more enjoyable on the back end of it. It makes you really appreciate the process of what happened to begin with. I would also suggest people watch it, especially if you're really into Saulnier in general. But also, if you just want a relatively sort of easygoing Halloween horror movie, that's really, I think, more funny than anything else. I think it's a good, not complicated movie to watch. So, do you have any thoughts about where you would rank it in our lineup at this point?
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Okay. I wish I remembered my old ranking. Uh,
Your old ranking was maybe Apostle, Monster Party, Tag, Terrifier, Drifter, Puka.
yeah, that sounds right.
I think that's the way it went.
God, do I put it above tag or below tag?
Ah, good question.
You know what? Let's go above tag. Right
Wow.
above tag.
A new reigning champion for third place? I think that was third place.
Yeah. You know what's funny is I don't remember if I did Apostle first or if I did Monster Party first.
I think you did Apostle first, but I could be wrong. You might have done Monster Party first.
I don't know. I liked them both. We're actually. Well, I guess we got Puka wedged in there, but I was gonna say we're on a roll. But
I mean, I didn't dislike Puka as much as you did, but I realized it was slow torture for you, and that you've had to kind of recuperate ever since then.
yeah. But I mean, I guess Tag could have been that way, and I enjoyed Tag. So
Yeah, you never know.
you never know.
You never know.
You ever wonder how much of it's just a function of your mood?
I mean, yeah. Well, it definitely affects it, right? I mean, I have to assume that it's always a function of your mood to some degree. I mean,
It shouldn't be, but I think it may be. Yeah.
I mean, all of life is a function of your mood to some degree. I mean, it shouldn't be, but
Yeah, it's kind of scary.
I mean, what mood were you in when you watched this movie?
You know, I'm probably not the best mood, and I think it helped. I think it
There you go.
helped. I mean,
Yeah,
I
it
think,
brought you up.
yeah, maybe I'm giving myself a hard time for nothing.
Yeah, you should definitely be easier on yourself, Dave.
That's good advice. I think I'll take that.
And, you know, any of the fans that are watching this right now should write in, let Dave know that he should be easier. And if nobody writes in, then that's your answer.
Well, no one's gonna write in.
Well, you called it, huh? Guess what, Dave? It's come to that time again.
Yeah, we should really work on an ending.
Yeah, the end of the show. There is no ending. It'll just go on and on. We should say thanks for watching, first off. If you haven't already, follow us on Twitter. We are at First Pick Show, I think, on Twitter, and at facebook.com/firstpickshow or some bullshit like that. I don't know. Doesn't really matter. Definitely subscribe to us on YouTube to get all the latest updates. We're trying out a new thing with format. We're having shorter little clips now and little shows now. Hopefully we can do more of that, and so there might be more updates more often. Who knows? Anything's possible.
Oh, you know what we should do?
What's that?
Let's put the Twitter in the description.
I do that.
You do?
Yeah, thanks for checking.
I should read that sometime.
I don't know if you've ever actually visited our YouTube page, Dave, but
Just to subscribe.
slowly but surely building an audience.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if I get another email address, we'll have 10. Green Room, because I was in Charlotte at the time when Green Room came out, it was actually only playing in Concord, so I had to drive out and go watch out there. And I love I can't wait for his next one. Like he's one of those guys.
Yeah. I'm with you on that. I really have to watch the other one there. The whole, what is it? After the Dark or
Hold the Dark.
Hold the Dark. I always want to say Turn Off the Dark. I'll never not want to say Spider-Man: Turn Off the Dark whenever I hear a dark title.
Yeah, you know what? I'm gonna do that now too. I think you're right.
Yeah, good. Always think Spider-Man: Turn Off the Dark.